migration and how we deal with that in this country. Now, it came up just before this programme, actually, the news broke, about the economic impact assessment. We talk a lot, don't we, in terms of the illegal migration bill, and we know where that is and all the rest of it. But what is the answer to people crossing the channel is the million-dollar question. Nobody knows. But tonight we can put some costs. We talk about Rwanda, and the costs now, the breakdown has come out, released, as I said, about an hour or so ago, £169,000. It has divided opinion. Some people, Alex, saying value for money, perfect strategy, get on with it. Other people saying it's an absolute waste of money. I'm playing that breakdown of costs on the screen in case you're interested as to how that figure was created. Alex, your thoughts?
My thought is that one should always take these projections and financial calculations with a certain pinch of salt. And I note, apart from anything else, that when the Climate Act went through our House of Commons, against which a mere 5 Conservative members of Parliament voted against, the initial impact statement showed an enormous cost to the legislation. Normally, when you have a cost impact statement, it shows that you're going to save a good deal of money. It showed it was going to cost Britain billions to go through the climate process, and therefore government went away, thought again, and found incredible amounts of savings that hadn't been seen before, and were able to demonstrate suddenly that the impact of the bill was reversed. So sometimes you can make these numbers say what you want them to say. But even if it was around this number, I would still think we're in the right position as a country for 2 reasons. The first is this is stated on the number of Rwandan flights we might get going presently. As you're able to send more people to Rwanda, there's an economy of scale, obviously, that means you benefit from sending more people and getting the costs down somewhat. But the second and much more important reason that it's still worth doing is the benefit of deterring people from coming in the first place. And it's that, whilst admittedly intangible, which makes this a hard calculation to undertake, and I'm not blaming the people who drew up these figures, but it seems to me, given the tangible figures we do know about how much it's costing us to put people up in hotels and so forth in this country every single day, it seems to me that this kind of deterrent policy is worth it, even if the cost is, and it seems remarkable it's this high, but even if the cost is as high as they say. Yeah, and I will just get that cost back up on the screen in case you're just tuning in and you're thinking, what on earth is Michelle talking about now? I'm talking about the £169,000 figure. One of the things that I find quite interesting and missing from that, correct me if I'm wrong, my eyes might be failing me, is where's all the legal costs? Are they assuming that this is post all the legal wranglings and now it's signed, sealed and delivered, and that is a delivery cost? That must be solely for people who've already been determined not to have a legitimate asylum or refugee claim. You see, Peter, I think when it comes to this issue, we can debate all this breakdown, you know, till the cows come home. For me, I do not understand what this government is waiting for. I don't know why they don't just put a flight to Rwanda and deal with the consequences afterwards. That would be a great deterrent, but nobody is doing it.
Well, they are bound by the law, and the law is very constraining on this. But
what would be the consequences of breaking it?
Well, that governments can't break laws.
Why not?
Because they rely it is the law that makes them the government. Once governments start breaking laws, you break down everything to anarchy. You simply cannot do it if you're going to claim to be civilised. But the real problem to me is that obviously the issue of the migration across the Channel is a major one, but there is a huge amount of immigration coming into this country, and the allegedly Conservative Party, which is the only way to describe it, has never during its time in office, either as coalition or by itself, made any serious efforts to bring it down, though it makes constant promises to do so. It's now become wiser in that it no longer makes specific promises, and it goes through this splashing and churning of the waters to make it look as if it's doing something. But I would be surprised if any of this leads to anything seriously. And there is a way, particularly of dealing with the Channel business, which is to recognise that what we basically have now is a land border with France, and to pay the French huge amounts of money to stop the migrants coming. That would be a major contribution, but it remains the case that it appears to me that the government wants there to be quite a high level of migration into this country, just as the previous Labour government did, and that is not going to change, because as far as I can see, their economic policy depends upon it.
This will be the thorn in the side of the Tories at the next, well, the back side and the front, quite frankly, of the Tories at this next election.
Thorns everywhere.
Yeah, thorn, because 606,000 was in the net migration, 46,000 people crossing the Channel last year. It is not sustainable.
I agree with you about two things. The first thing, I think, is that people shouldn't come to this country by the means we're talking about across the Channel. It's across an incredibly dangerous body of water. By necessity, it's demonstrating they're not coming by routes by which they've been invited or have lawful means to come. And in my view, if you come from a safe country, you shouldn't be deemed to have a reasonable asylum or refugee claim in the first place. Conceding, as I do, that Peter is right, that currently in international law that is not how the world is perceived, I think that we should withdraw from any agreement that obliges us to say that it is. But the bigger issue isn't actually about people coming across the Channel. It's about lawful migration, which is what Peter was talking about. People coming here lawfully and coming in numbers that mean that they can't possibly be assimilated into a functioning economy in any real timeline. And I think that the thing to think about from that perspective is that when people told us during the Labour years, when at least people were direct about the fact they wanted higher immigration into this country, they told us that it would result in fixing our skills shortage and would plug an unemployment gap. We have the same skills shortage now that we did then, after allowing millions of net migration to this country since that began, and we have the same sort, even in a tight economy, we still have the same level of unemployment.
Yes, we do, and these things all actually come back. The whole problem with migration, and like so many other problems, come back to the misgovernment of this country, the failure of its education system to turn out people who are capable, in many cases, of being employed, the failure of our education system to train people in the skills that are actually needed, and it is a huge, huge gap which no government, for dogmatic reasons, in my view, is prepared to tackle. So they turn to migration. Yet again, it's the failure to do the basic domestic things. It's like somebody who can't fix the plumbing or the wiring in his house, who lets the roof rot, but who engages in showy gestures to try and draw attention away from the fact that he isn't actually any good at maintaining his own home.
Peter, may I ask why? So, because I agree with some of the points you make about the outcome, I certainly don't think immigration's the fix to the problem we're discussing. Why do you think it's just, or at least from what you just said, it seems to me that you think the responsibility lies predominantly or wholly with the state? I didn't hear the word parent once in the children going through our education system. Please.
Well, because for 60 years, the governments of both parties have successfully undermined the family as an institution in our society.
But that doesn't mean you or I could think as parents.
They've especially undermined and weakened marriage, and as a result, many people don't have the family background they would once have had.
Peter,
the state, as the family gets weaker, the state gets stronger. You must have known.
But for your purposes, let's assume that Peter's view is right, and all the politicians are bad and wrong, and have got this wrong.
Let's say they're bad.
OK, all the politicians have got this wrong and have been useless. From your perspective, you and I can still think parents have a responsibility they've failed on, can't we?
We can think it, but legislation, whether it be the divorce laws of this country, which make it incredibly easy to break up marriage, the welfare system and the tax system, which does not in any way help those parents who want to bring up their own children, and actually encourages parents to hand over their children to paid strangers and weaken the family, the withdrawal of authority from adults in schools, on the streets, the vanishing of the police. When I was growing up in this country, there were fathers in every house, there were policemen on every street, there were park keepers in every park, there were conductors on every bus, there were many male teachers in the schools. The whole aspect of authority, particularly which boys and young men encountered, was enormous. We've transformed society away from that. We now see the results, and rather than saying, actually, this was a mistake, we carry on doing it. The reason why I'm particularly annoyed about this tonight is, as I spent last week in prison,
yes,
in an extraordinary experiment which Channel 4 is conducting, in which they put a number of minor celebrities such as me in with real ex-prisoners and real prison officers in a very, very close similitude of what real prison would be like. And what I came away with was a very strong feeling that, of course, there's much wrong with our prisons. But mostly what's wrong with our prisons is that into them feed all these channels of failed government. What you find in prison is a result of stupid, unnecessary policies pursued for many years, not stopped, not reformed, not moderated by the supposed Conservative Party, but actually supported by it. Where do we turn if we want to actually set our society back on the sensible route that it was on 50 years ago and turn away from these stupid social experiments? Who do we turn to?
I know,
There's
Michelle
nobody
wants us, I know Michelle wants us to move on, so I just make the point. It seems in all of that you still think that you're a big government person. You still think in the end government is the answer, the responsibility and the main driver.
Governments make a difference. It is, if you trace these changes, they originate in legislation, they originate in taxation policy, and they originate in welfare policy, and they have been the result of government action. And therefore, to put them right, you need government action.
Yeah, I understand that's your perspective.
To reverse the mistakes.
If you stop believing in individual responsibility being the primary driver of these things, in the end, you keep dreaming of systems so perfect that mankind has no need any longer, only need to be good.
I don't
and
think
that is not true.
You can't accuse me of that. I'm the opposite. I'm absolutely anti-utopian. I used to be utopian, and I've completely rejected
Peter,
it.
you've gone all the way round to the back. The two extremes meet round the back.
No, they absolutely do not. You can't describe me as social conservative and Anglican Christian as a dogmatic utopian. It's nonsense. I'm absolutely the opposite of those things, and it's an absurd jibe which just runs off me. If you're going to argue about this seriously, you have to understand that it's government decisions and policies taken particularly after the 1960s which have changed our society beyond all recognition.
Well,
if you don't put them right, then those changes will continue to rot our society as they're doing.